She walked into the restaurant with confidence, dressed elegantly and carrying herself with quiet grace. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, a celebration of her latest success. But before she could even reach her table, the host gave her a long look, whispered something to a colleague, and suddenly she was being turned away. No reservation, no explanation, just a cold smile and a polite, "We're fully booked tonight." The message was clear: she didn't belong there. But what they didn't know was who she really was. Behind the calm expression was a woman who had built her own company from scratch, faced rejection more times than she could count, and learned how to turn every no into something far more powerful. That night, she walked out of the restaurant quietly, but she didn't forget. What started as a humiliating moment would soon turn into the beginning of something much bigger. Days later, that same restaurant would be under new ownership. New signs, new rules, and a list of former staff no longer welcome behind its doors. The same people who once looked down on her would find their names crossed off the payroll. No drama, no shouting, just a quiet shift in power. But what really happened in those days between the rejection and the takeover? How did she go from customer to owner in such a short time? And what did she say the moment she walked back through those doors? This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about resilience, self-worth, and what happens when you finally take control of the spaces that once excluded you. Stay with us, because what comes next will leave you speechless. Her name was Maya. Not someone you'd find flashing luxury or chasing attention. She preferred to keep her wins quiet, her moves even quieter. What most people didn't know was that Maya had spent the last decade building a chain of boutique wellness studios across the city, all self-funded, all thriving. She'd faced discrimination before, subtle jabs in meetings, doors that never opened, smiles that never reached the eyes. But she'd always let her work speak louder than the noise. Still, something about that night stuck with her. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the way they looked at her. As if she didn't belong in their world, as if her success didn't matter because it wasn't loud or familiar. That restaurant, a high-end spot known more for who dined there than what was served, had always prided itself on exclusivity. They just never expected that someone they dismissed could ever own the place. Maya didn't lash out. She didn't post about it or confront the staff. Instead, she made a few quiet calls. Turns out, the restaurant had been bleeding money for months. Poor management, unpaid taxes, and a silent investor desperate to let go. It was almost too easy. But Maya didn't want just revenge. She wanted a statement. A quiet one, the kind people whisper about at dinner parties. She kept her name off the deal, used a holding company, and planned every move in silence. Behind the scenes, she was already designing a new future for that space, a place where no one would ever feel like they didn't belong. What she didn't expect, though, was what she'd uncover once she took ownership. Something deeper, something no one saw coming. The deeper Maya got into the business, the more she realized the restaurant wasn't just cold on the surface, it was rotting from within. The staff turnover was unusually high, the finances a mess, and the kitchen, once praised in glossy magazines, barely held together by overworked chefs and outdated equipment. But it wasn't just the numbers that raised red flags. There were stories whispered behind closed doors about favoritism, mistreatment, and regular guests who were treated like royalty while others, depending on how they looked or dressed, were quietly pushed aside. Maya began digging, and what she found only made her more determined. Former employees reached out anonymously, sharing how they were underpaid, ignored, and in some cases, humiliated by senior staff. It was the same energy she had felt the night they turned her away. This quiet, calculated gatekeeping disguised as luxury. The place wasn't just broken, it was toxic. While planning the relaunch, Maya started making quiet visits to observe the staff she had inherited. Some were just following orders. Others, however, were clearly part of the problem, including the same manager who had denied her entry weeks ago. He still walked the floor like he owned it, unaware that the new owner watched from a corner table, taking notes, seeing everything. At the same time, rumors began swirling within the staff. Someone new was taking over. Someone silent but serious. The atmosphere shifted. Some employees started acting cautious, others defensive. The tension in the air was thick. But behind the scenes, Maya was also facing pushback. The old investors, now sidelined, weren't happy. And one in particular wasn't going to walk away quietly. There were deals, connections, and secrets she hadn't uncovered yet, and someone wanted to keep them buried. The relaunch was just 2 weeks away, and the pressure was mounting. Maya had kept her identity hidden from most of the staff, but whispers were spreading fast. Some suspected the truth, others were just nervous, unsure if they'd still have jobs by the end of the month. The restaurant had become a storm of rumors, tension, and eyes constantly watching the doors. But the real threat was happening outside the walls. One of the original investors, a man with deep pockets and even deeper grudges, had caught wind of Maya's quiet takeover. He had once been the restaurant's silent partner, more interested in the image than the business itself. But now his pride was on the line. He began showing up unannounced, meeting with remaining staff behind Maya's back, asking questions, pulling favors. It was clear he wasn't ready to let go, and worse, he wasn't above playing dirty. Then, late one evening, Maya received a call from her lawyer. A last-minute legal roadblock had been filed, something about ownership paperwork, a clause buried in the original lease agreement. It was enough to delay the launch, maybe even stop it altogether. And while that played out, strange things began happening inside the restaurant. Orders went missing. Equipment suddenly failed. A fire alarm triggered in the middle of a private tasting event. No one had proof, but Maya knew this wasn't coincidence. Someone was sabotaging her from the inside. Still, she stayed calm, watching, listening. Her team, a small circle of loyal staff she had quietly brought in, worked overtime to keep things moving. But even they started to feel the cracks. Maya had come this far, but now everything she had built, everything she stood for, was hanging by a thread. And then, on a rainy Wednesday morning, someone left an envelope at her door. No name, just a single line typed across the page. Maya stared at the envelope, heart pounding. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the single sheet inside. The words were simple, but the message clear. Asterisk, you're not the only one with secrets. Asterisk, no signature, no return address. But the timing was no accident. It was a threat, one that suggested someone had been watching her closely, maybe even digging into her past. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maya had fought hard to build everything she had, keeping her private life just that, private. But years ago, before the success and the spotlight, she had made choices. Not illegal, not scandalous, but things that could be twisted by someone determined enough. A messy business fallout. A partner who had taken credit for her work. She'd walked away quietly, never looked back, but someone clearly had. The real shock came the next day when she checked the restaurant's internal system and saw new login activity from a device that didn't belong to anyone on her current team. Someone had gained access to sensitive renovation plans, financial reports, and staff schedules. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was surveillance. And then came the worst blow. One of her trusted new hires, someone she had brought in personally, vanished overnight. No goodbye, no notice, just gone. And with them, a company laptop. Suddenly, everything was spinning. The investor who wouldn't let go, the envelope with the message, the missing employee, it all started to feel connected. Maya had thought this was just about taking back power in a space that once rejected her, but now it felt bigger. More dangerous. She wasn't just fighting for ownership anymore. She was fighting to protect everything she had built. And someone out there was determined to make her fall. The night of the relaunch arrived, and despite everything, the threats, the sabotage, the missing staff, Maya stood in the middle of the restaurant, calm and ready. The space had been transformed. Warm lighting, open seating, and a welcoming energy replaced the stiff, cold atmosphere it once held. Guests began to arrive, some curious, others skeptical. Among them, Maya noticed familiar faces. The former manager, now just another guest. The silent investor, seated at the far end, arms folded, eyes sharp. Everything ran smoothly until halfway through the evening, when a loud voice cut through the quiet hum of the room. A local journalist, tipped off by an anonymous source, stood at the center with questions about Maya's past business dealings. He held the missing laptop. Somehow, it had landed in his hands, loaded with files meant to discredit her. The room fell silent. But Maya didn't panic. She stepped forward and spoke with clarity. "Yes, I've made mistakes. I've failed, I've lost, and I've been taken advantage of. But I've never taken from anyone. I built everything here from the ground up. And this place, today, is a space for people who were once told they didn't belong." She paused, then turned to the journalist. "If you still think this story is about a restaurant, go ahead and run it. But the real story is happening right here." The crowd responded with quiet applause. The journalist, unprepared for the grace in her response, backed down. And just when Maya thought it was over, a woman approached her in tears. It was the employee who vanished. She'd been threatened to spy on Maya and fled when it got too dangerous. She handed Maya a second envelope. Inside it, evidence linking the investor to years of financial fraud, signed, dated, and now fully exposed. The next morning, Maya handed the documents over to her legal team. Within days, investigations were opened, and the former investor found himself at the center of a scandal that had nothing to do with Maya and everything to do with his own greed. His silent threats were over. The truth had a way of rising, and this time, it had come straight from someone he thought he could manipulate. The staff, now fully aware of the story behind the restaurant's transformation, stood behind Maya with more respect than ever. Those who had been loyal were offered permanent positions with better pay and a say in the new culture Maya was building. The employee who came forward, Maya didn't just forgive her, she promoted her. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild, but courage like that couldn't go unnoticed. The restaurant slowly began gaining attention, not just for its new design or menu, but for its story. People who had never felt welcome before now filled the seats. Locals, artists, entrepreneurs, families, everyone had a place. It wasn't about status anymore. It was about people. Maya never gave a press conference. She didn't need to. The story spread on its own, not just as a tale of quiet revenge or business success, but as a reminder that dignity always wins in the long run. What started with rejection had become a symbol of change, and not just for one woman, but for everyone watching from the sidelines. In the end, Maya didn't just buy the restaurant, she redefined it. And somewhere in the laughter and conversation that now filled the space, the memory of being turned away faded into something stronger: purpose. And that was the real victory.